And we're going to begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And g'day. I am so glad you could join us. And today's reading gives us an amazing glimpse into an aspect of God that Isaiah saw, as we see in today's reading from Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. I cried, Woe to me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me. This is like, wow, what an experience. And yet the way Isaiah has described this incredible sight would have to be a forerunner to the Reader's Digest condensed version of books. Isaiah doesn't waste words, using easy to understand language, and by its very simplicity, Isaiah is showing how impossible it was for him to find the right words to do justice to what he saw. And yet, at the same time, he has managed to convey the awesomeness of seeing God in all his glory and majesty. And if you have listened to last week's message on Jeremiah's call from God, you would be struck by the difference between the way God reveals his call to each man. And this confirms to us how God isn't limited to any preconceived idea as to how he will call someone to go over and beyond the normal role that he expects from all his people, how they are to show the people around them just what God is like. There is also a couple of things we need to be aware of before we jump into looking at this call of Isaiah's. Firstly, commentators debate about whether this call came prior to the first 5 chapters or whether this was a second call. Some believe the first 5 chapters are the introduction outlining what is to come in the book before getting into the nitty-gritty of his prophecies. Others believe the encounter with God occurred first, and Isaiah has placed it here to make a strong theological point. And others, again, consider that because this event occurs shortly after King Uzziah dies, and that is obvious because there is no mention of the year of Uzziah's reign that this happened in, and how Uzziah's death exposed their vulnerability, highlighting the true state of Israel's backsliding from God, how they had been relying on a human king's power instead of their powerful Creator God. And of course, as Isaiah isn't around to ask, we will never know why he did it the way he did. There is one thing for sure though. This was no random accident by Isaiah in placing this encounter with God here in his book. For when you look at the first 5 chapters, you find God using Isaiah to tell his people things like, and to keep it short, I have only covered the very basic points by lumping repeated ideas together. So you really do need to go and read the whole 5 chapters to get a better context of what God is saying to his people. My children persist in rebelling against me. They have set up yours to the Holy One of Israel. Both their words and deeds are rebelling against his glorious presence. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Stop bringing meaningless offerings. O my people, your guides lead you astray. They turn you from the path. They have brought disaster upon themselves. The Lord takes his place in court. He rises to judge the elders and leaders of his people. The Lord Almighty has a day in store where all the arrogant, proud, and lofty who exalt themselves will be brought low and humbled. In that day, the Lord Almighty will be exalted by his justice, and the holy God will show himself holy by his righteousness. From that small snippet, we are given the idea of how God's people had rejected God's right to rule over them, and that included their king, deciding they knew better than God, and so they had gone their own way, doing their own thing. But at the same time, to all appearances, they were worshipping him. Of course, God saw through their deception and called them out. The other thing is that amongst those 5 chapters, God was also giving them positive reasons to change, as we see in Isaiah 1:19, 2:5 and 3:30, where he tells them, if you are willing and obedient, you will eat the best from the land. Come, my people, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Tell the righteous, it will be well with them, for they will enjoy the fruit of their deeds. But, as we know, they didn't change their ways. They continued on doing their thing, not listening to Isaiah. And it wasn't like it was only Isaiah, for there were the prophets before him and other prophets at the same time as Isaiah, all saying virtually the same thing. There was no way they could have escaped hearing God's repeated messages of repent, change your ways before it is too late. And so, with all that in mind, we come to chapter 6, verse 1, and Isaiah seeing the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Now, just curious, while I was reading the verses, did you perhaps think, hey, wait up a minute, doesn't the Bible say that if you see God, you will die? And yes, you are right, it does. In Genesis chapter 32, verse 30, and Judges chapter 13, verse 22, where this is indirectly implied by people being amazed at seeing God face to face and living. and then also by God himself, first in Exodus chapter 19, verse 21, and later on in chapter 33, verse 20, where God, after telling Moses he is pleased with him, says to Moses, "But you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Which is what happened. Moses didn't see God's face. He saw his back. Now, thinking back to the Isaiah reading, did you notice that Isaiah says nothing about what God's face looks like? Remember how verse 1 says, "I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple." Isaiah is only giving a description of the glory and majesty in what he sees and hears. Therefore, it could be safely assumed that Isaiah didn't see God's face, that the glory of God hid his face from him. And thinking about it, that makes sense, because in Revelation chapter 21, verses 21 and 23, we are told the new city doesn't need light because the main street is pure gold, and God's glory is its light, and the Lamb its lamp. Just think of all that incredibly bright golden light shining out from God. So for Isaiah, it would have been like standing in the shade and looking out at a person who is standing with the strong midday sunlight shining all around them. All you can see is the form of a person, not their features. And God, in allowing Isaiah to see him sitting on a high and lofty throne, is, without words, making it perfectly clear that he is in the presence of the King of Kings. God is like, take a good look and consider how you thought Isaiah was powerful. He is nothing compared to me. You and my people need to start looking to the one and only powerful King who can help you. And to all of you who think you are so high and mighty, that you are better than anyone else, that you are right with me, it is time to start comparing yourselves to the real deal. This is what your God is like. I am the one you should be exalting. I am the one who has the power. And not only was God spectacular in appearance, let's stop and look at the seraphs. Oh, and by the way, the word is translated elsewhere as flying serpents, but the root word means flame, scorch, etc. So the picture the original audience would have got would have been 6-winged flaming or burning dragons, which then makes sense of verse 4, where Isaiah describes how the temple was filled with smoke. It sounds like these seraphim were doing more than breathing fire. They were aflame. These seraphim are nothing like the sweet, robed in white angels we see in pictures. These guys, who are God's attendants, don't sound like someone you would want to mess with. But what were they doing? Going on dangerous missions? Nope. They were in constant motion, flying around God, and as verse 3 says, they were calling to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." We are not told how many seraphim there were, but either they had pretty loud outside in the back paddock voices, or there was an awful lot of them making this rich, resounding baritone choir, much better sounding than me. For as they sung about God's holiness to each other, verse 4 describes how, at the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook. And this was not just a one-off. This was a continuous song of praise. They would sing out to each other, and then there would be an instantaneous, joyous response of praise. They were articulating the supreme truth they knew about the King of Kings, the Lord Almighty, that God is so holy that you have to express it 3 times over and then over and over again to ensure emphasis is on the complete totality of God's holiness. And then the enormous train filling the temple is a great visual to back up their finishing catchphrase, "The whole earth is full of His glory." Now, this scene with all the smoke and the building shaking would have reminded Isaiah of a well-known narrative from their scripture, which we know too, where in Exodus chapter 19, verse 18, it describes Moses leading the people to meet God and how the Lord descended on the mountain in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently. This event was seared in the nation's consciousness, for it was where God had set up the commands as part of the deal between them, and in keeping them, they would remember God's great loving actions in freeing them from slavery. And as we learned earlier, obviously the Israelites were no longer keeping their end of the deal, and God was getting close to the end of His patience with their willful disobedience. Now, the interesting thing is that if Isaiah was prophesying on God's behalf before this, it can be safely assumed he was right with God and already obeying Him. And if the previous verses were an introduction, we can still be fairly certain that Isaiah was already loyal to his God. And yet, the sight of God on His throne, the blazing seraphs filling the temple with smoke, and their thunderous noise as they sang out to each other, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory," made Isaiah see that while he had thought he knew God and was right with God, he was totally clueless about just how awesome and raw and powerful the holiness of his God really was. And not only had the light of God displayed His powerful holiness, the light had also revealed Isaiah's innermost heart thoughts, and he realized that he wasn't as squeaky clean as he thought he was. He didn't like what he saw about himself, how dark and sinful he really was. And while his sins were different to his fellow Israelites, he was just as sinful as them in God's eyes. The light of God had revealed to him how all people, from kings all the way down to him, needed to be aware that even their best behavior was sinful to a holy God. To Isaiah's dismay, he had discovered that it wasn't just those bad, awful people out there that he'd been prophesying against or railing against, wondering why God wasn't doing anything about their sins. He came to be grateful that God wasn't doing anything to him because of his sinful state. And as the full reality of his sinful heart condition was exposed under the light of the holy God, and agonizing cry from his heart burst from him. "Woe to me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." Now, the Hebrew word translated here as ruined, or in other versions as lost, carries the meanings to cease to exist, to be destroyed. He now understood that not even being an Israelite, one of God's chosen people that he was so proud of being, was enough. Seeing God's holiness and glory with his own eyes had exposed his true character, and it wasn't pretty. He could see that without God's mercy he was as good as dead. There was nothing he could do of his own accord to be worthy of a powerful, holy God. And of course, the holy God could see the true repentance in his heart, and on hearing the anguish in his cry, immediately, without a word, he set about healing him. For as we read in verse 6, one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. I don't know about you, but isn't that just the coolest thing? Technically, Isaiah didn't ask for forgiveness the moment he felt the agony of his sinful state and acknowledged that he was a sinner in the sight of a holy God. God's seraph went into action, bringing a live coal in his hand, touching his mouth. I say it is cool because it wasn't happening to me. Looking on is like, wow, what an amazing scene. But I am not sure how Isaiah would have felt having the flaming, burning serpent grab a hot coal and put it against his lips. Like, ouch, that would have been painful. Just think how highly sensitive our lips are to touch, warmth and cold, and how much it hurts if you accidentally touch your lips after rubbing in sore muscles with heat rub. I reckon it is incredible the way Isaiah didn't automatically step back and put up his hands to protect his face from the hot coal. This shows how willing he was to be cleansed from his sins. He understood from the burnt sacrifices that they had to constantly offer to God that it was the pure, burning, purifying effect of the sacrifice on the fire that gave them God's forgiveness. And imagine the feeling he had, the touch of the coal leaving a burning sensation on his lips. And then he heard the seraph proclaim, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." Personally, I think this moment would have made a far greater impression on him than when he first set eyes on the holy God in all his glorious majesty on the high and lofty throne. Like, I am sure you can remember that first time when you realized to your dismay that you aren't the good person you thought you were, and like Isaiah had, you cried out in pain and horror to God for forgiveness, or whatever words you used, and how there was this amazing sense of relief and joy flooding through you as you accepted that God had forgiven you. Now, we don't have time to cover all aspects of forgiveness and our willingness or not to accept God has forgiven us here, so that will have to wait for another time. Or even better, go look it up for yourself. And remember to keep it in context. And now that Isaiah has understood his sinfulness and has been forgiven, in verse 8, Isaiah hears God asking an indirect question to all in the temple, querying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And of course, Isaiah, after discovering his sinful state and then his holy God, who could have burnt him to a crisp, forgave him, is naturally all gung-ho to help. And so without checking the terms and conditions, and like an enthusiastic child, he sticks up his hand saying, "Here I am, send me." And this is where today's reading usually ends. And at this point, pastors will say something like, "Be like Isaiah, say, 'Here I am, send me.'" But you see, that's missing all the important context. You don't learn what God is sending Isaiah into. You need to know what comes next in verses 9 to 13, where God ups the ante on Isaiah's previous prophecies, assuming they did come before this event, as he says in verses 9 to 13. "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." Then I said, "For how long, O Lord?" He answered with, "Until the cities are ruined, without citizens, until the fields are ruined and ravaged, until the land is utterly forsaken, until the Lord has sent everyone far away. And although only a tenth remain in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land." And this gives us a very different picture to what I have heard preached, where we have been told something along the lines of, "All you need to do is just ask your neighbour to come to church, for they are waiting for you to ask." Or, "Just be a good neighbour, and before you know it, they will come to church with you." Well, like Jeremiah was told last week, and now Isaiah, God is painting a very different picture to them of what their ministry to his wayward people will look like. And the first thing to note is that Isaiah is not being asked to go and tell people who haven't heard or care about this incredible holy God he saw who forgave his sins. No, Isaiah is being sent to his fellow Israelites, people who should know God well, and some who by their weekly attendance and sacrifices acted like they were good, godly people. And then there were others who had drifted away from God and were no longer interested in trying to pretend they were his chosen people, because they were very happy with their lives, thank you very much. They didn't need God interfering in their business. Oh, but to keep God happy, they will turn up at the special church events. That will do the trick. God is explaining to Isaiah just how tough it's going to be, dealing with his people who were even worse than a problem child. For God knows the true state of his people's hearts, and it ain't pretty. They have gone their own way for so long, and God is letting Isaiah know that he can tell them the truth about themselves until he is blue in the face, and it won't make an iota of difference to them. For they have lied to themselves for so long about the state of their relationship with God that they won't be able to see or hear the truth about themselves. As God says in verses 9 to 10, "Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. This wouldn't have shocked Isaiah that much. He had already seen it happening. The people backsliding away from God, some quickly, getting in a huff over obeying a rule of God's that they didn't want to keep, and others slowly over time, a missed synagogue meeting here and there. Oh, 'cause, hey, they had partied hard last night, and God won't mind. Look up the Sabbath command. Followed by a period of ill health, and suddenly they were attending the synagogue once a year for the main event, the Passover, because that one is fun and the food is great. Isaiah understood that in some ways these people God was sending him to were going to be miles harder to convince of their need to repent and change their ways than it had been for Jonah some 40-ish years ago to the mean and nasty Ninevites. They had repented very quickly. So Isaiah naturally wondered in verse 11, "For how long, O Lord?" I don't think there is any way Isaiah would have been expecting this answer we find in verses 11 to 13a. Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far, far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. God is laying the cards on the table. Sorry, mate, but there is no hope. You will not see a harvest for your work. In fact, it's going to get real bad. And even that's nothing, because it will be even worse before I am finished giving my disobedient people the consequences for being disloyal and turning away from me that were clearly spelled out to them when they entered this land. This was the mission Isaiah had accepted. He had chosen to reject the easy road of being a false prophet, preaching to the people that God loves them, God will bless them. No way will God dish out consequences for their flagrant sins and deliberate disobedience. By doing that, Isaiah would have been popular, and like the other false prophets, he would have gained a huge following, including the kings. But this would have been superficial, all lies. The people would have continued on their merry way, being blind to the fact that God has had it up to here, and his patience is wearing very thin, and they are skating on thin ice. God wants them to know that he is deadly serious, that a day is coming when he will stop counting to 3, and to his hurt and dismay, he will send his chosen people away from him into exile. All they need to do is listen to the warnings, how they just need to wake up to themselves and turn and be healed. But God, big God, knows that won't happen. And so he gives Isaiah a hint that points back to the plan to save people from themselves in Genesis, and points to how God will make sure that that plan will happen as he finishes verse 13 with, "But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land." Here God is saying, I have to stop you from completely turning away from me, For if I don't, one day there will be no one left who follows and loves me, for me to love and care for. So Israel will be destroyed, but not completely. There will be just a stump of a nation left, appearing dead on the outside, but on the inside there is this small flicker of life hanging on in there, slowly pushing its way to the surface to eventually grow into a tree again. And Isaiah got the analogy how God had promised Eve that her seed will crush the serpent's head, and later he had promised Abraham multiple times that his seed will inherit the land he is a stranger in. And we too can get an even better picture of the analogy, because we have the likes of Apostle Paul explaining to the Galatian Christians in chapter 3 verse 29 that if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And we also have the Apostle Peter expanding on the seed idea, as he tells his readers in 1 Peter chapter 1 verses 23 to 24, for you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and enduring word of God. And then the Apostle John, in his first letter, chapter 3, verses 8 to 10, fleshes the seed concept out with the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. No one who is born of God will continue to sin, because God's seed remains in him. He cannot go on sinning because he has been born of God. This is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. Anyone who does not do what is right is not a child of God. And while the majority of us won't be called to be like Isaiah, to proclaim to the nation that they need to repent and turn back to God, but literally all of us who have listened and seen the holy God and acknowledged our sinful condition and cried out to God and allowed God to touch us with his forgiveness, then the awesome thing is that now we all belong to Christ. And because we believe in Jesus, we are called by God to warn those within our church families who are acting all holy on a Sunday, but you know that for the rest of the week God is ignored. And all of us are called to keep an eye out for someone who is suddenly not at church and go and follow them up, helping them to see that they don't want to end up being like God's people that Isaiah spoke to. But at the same time, we need to be remembering God's job description to Isaiah, and so be prepared for the fact that we may not see any results. But just like Isaiah never saw the stump become a tree again, while we can't see any positive outcomes in souls saved by returning to the Lord, we can be confident that while there is a dead-looking stump of faith, God can take our words, making them like seeds that can cause the stump to start growing again, where they will turn back to the holy God and be healed of their sins by his touch. And then together we can all stop sinning because God's seed is in us, showing the world around us that we are fair dinkum children of God. Amen.